Yeah, so I have a lot of notes.
Excellent. Yeah,
Yeah,
time for the fascist episode. Let's go.
yeah. So I wasn't.
Fascist
I
this
was
one.
trying to figure out like, sort of like, I don't know which disclaimer to give first. I don't know. Where- I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. Cameron, the Loki of our podcast, made me read a book, and I hated it. It was a horrible, horrible book. But it was worth talking about. It was worth talking about with him. I learned some things about him, and I think there were at least a couple of non-horrible elements present in the book that we read. I suspect that a certain portion of the audience will be upset that we are even talking about this book at all. And I suspect that another portion of the audience, and I honestly don't know which one is bigger, will be upset at how mean we are about its horribleness. Although, as I said, I think there were some things worth getting out of it, and maybe I may not have been the ideal audience for it. Here's my thought about this. So it was a really fun conversation. It sort of broke all of the SLEERICKETS rules, including getting more into politics than we usually try to get into. But some of you, I think, will be really into it. Some of you will not. Here's the comparison that came to mind. So when I was in Cleveland, Elijah Blumoff of Versecraft put together a wonderful reading symposium evening in Cleveland some time ago, and I was there for a night beforehand. So when I got there, the reading was lovely, the symposium was lovely, the recording with him was lovely, all of the people were lovely. What was not lovely is the hotel where I stayed. This hotel was in a part of town that I hesitate to describe as a part of town. This 6-story formstone monolith was by far, easily the tallest building for miles around. So that first night I went down to the front desk and I asked the girl there if she had any recommendations for a place nearby to eat. And she shrugged. She looked at me like she didn't understand the question. And here's the thing. She was right not to understand the question. This district had hospitals. It had empty lots. It had abandoned office parks. It had recently shuttered bagel shops. It had unidentifiable burned buildings. It had overpasses to nowhere. It had dead-end train tracks. It was like if Thomas Ligotti wrote Child Roll Into the Dark Tower came. That's where I was living. I walked that night for a good hour and a half before I came to anywhere I could eat anything. This was at 8:45 p.m. I finally came to a little tiny spot. It was half underground. It was like you had to step down a half story into the earth to go into this place. There was no name of the business that I could identify. Just a neon sign that said open, and then a poster on the front door that read, "I'm really into fitness. Fitness sandwich in my mouth." For which slogan I give them full marks. That was well, they could not have improved that. But tellingly, this was not a sandwich shop. They did not sell any sandwiches there. So I did eventually get a couple of very dense slices of pizza and a lukewarm Diet Coke. And while I was eating them, the thought that occurred to me was, I can't say that this tastes good, but I can say that it is definitely not good for me. And that's maybe how you could think about this episode. It is, some podcasts like to do fun episodes and then vegetables episodes. One of my goals in producing SLEERICKETS was never to do a vegetables episode. Granted, you may find some of the things we talk about boring, but it's not because we're doing an episode that's good for you. We're just doing episodes that are interesting to us. This is one that I think some of you may not enjoy, but it definitely won't be good for you. I will leave the actual introduction of the subject to Cameron because I think he does a pretty good job. For now, though, as Harry Harlow said to the generation of rhesus macaques that he bioengineered into what he later described as the most evil mothers known to nature, welcome to the pit of despair. So I read the first third in book form, and then I finally I've given him more money by getting the audiobook too, because it was so physically painful to read that I had to listen to it.
Oh, I didn't know there was an audiobook. I wonder, how does that sound?
Yeah.
Does he read it out?
No. It feels like it would make much more sense if he did. It's read out by I feel like the guy's a very good sport. He's like a professional actor. I mean, I think he's like not especially successful. He's like a professional actor. He has a very good voice. It feels to me like maybe hints of Southern in his voice. Very, very sort of serious, straight-faced, including all of the broken English, but he can pronounce none of the old names. Zero. Here's the thing I realized reading it, that like it taught me about how I read, because I knew that I needed to kind of like, on some level, hear the voice in my head. But when a voice is this consistently strange in its texture, and it is, again, like I think looking at some of his like posts under his own name online, or even the posts under the pseudonym. This is Bronze Age Pervert, who's Costin Alamariu, so a Romanian, and it is unlike, so Romanian has romance, is a romance language, but it also apparently is. It takes from the Slavic tradition the dropped articles. It does not have articles. That's what I was here, like, because I associate that with Russian, because Russian doesn't have articles. And so he drops like half, or like a third, but not all of his articles in the book. And the texture it gave is like, I kept trying to like I realized like I needed to find a credible voice in my head that I could imagine speaking this. Yeah. And it is like, it's the problem I have with like experimental poetry is I can't concoct a voice that makes sense to me that would be speaking this.
A human voice.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And so, or even like a non-human voice that is still a coherent entity of some kind. And so what I realized is like, in order to read and comprehend the book, I needed to read it in my own head with a thick Slavic accent. But then, because it has so much anti-Semitism and racism in it, the voice that kept appearing in my head was Borat. Like it was like an Eastern European racist voice. Like I kept hearing Borat. Oh, and that was the thing.
He does sound a bit like Borat. I listened to his podcast, and he does sound a little. That's not too far off.
Right, it's got some of that to it. But then the other thing that came to mind, that like it was a different credible voice that made sense when I listened to the audiobook, which is, as I said, just like a normal American guy who I think he has there's a slight rasp or something, because then the voice I was hearing was Matt Chrisman, who's he's one of the original Chapo Trap House hosts, but he's very, very well read. He's like an amateur historian. He's very smart and very, very quick-witted, fluent thinker, but he had a stroke a couple years ago. And so like his speech now is very broken up in exactly this kind of way.
I see. Oh.
And so it was like either Eastern European broken English or stroke English is like how I was able to read this and have it make sense in my head.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
So do we, I mean, I feel like we need to both introduce why, like, what is so like clearly objectionable about this book, as well as why we're bothering to talk about it.
Okay. Yes.
So do you want to, since you're responsible for this, do you want to give a spiel?
Since I brought it along. Yeah, I'll do the spiel too. I mean, I think this episode may well be enjoyed only by one person, and that's Ethan, because I know I told Ethan that we were doing this.
Should
He was
we?
very
I was going to say
excited.
he does not. He certainly does not like share
He
this
does not
guy's
agree with
beliefs.
it. No,
No,
no, no, no,
but
no.
but I should say like he also, and I will leave this name unmentioned, but like he
Uh-huh.
named a different, also extremely well read, very intelligent poet whom I respect, who is very into this guy.
Yes,
So
yes. Well, there's
like
quite a few people into him,
just
but
right,
yeah,
like
yeah,
that's the thing is like I know like
yeah.
at least three very smart, very well read
Yeah.
people who find this worth reading, even
Oh
if
yeah.
without endorsing it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
So
yeah,
yeah,
I know some other people who are probably smarter than me who like this book as well. And I know other people like Elijah who think this book is complete trash and
yeah.
completely beneath anyone's
think
interest. So, you
I
know.
may be I think I may be Elijah Standen on this episode.
Well, there should be a time when you should be obliged to standing because it hasn't happened in ages.
Right,
So,
right, yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
seems just.
yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, so Bronze Age Mindset is a self-published exhortation, not a book of philosophy. It says very, very sternly at the beginning that this is an exhortation instead of a philosophical text. But it's basically a cross between a sort of far-right self-help book, a philosophical interrogation on the problems of modernity, and a long, deeply anti-Semitic, misogynistic, and racist rant about the current world. That I think it was published in 2023, I believe.
I
Yeah,
wanted to say
that's
I heard about this because he has another book that's called like selective breeding and something that came
yes, I
out
have
like
that. I haven't read it,
yeah, yeah, that came out
but
much more recently. No, so Bronze Age
yeah.
Mindset came out in 2018, but
Oh shit.
I
Okay.
think it
Oh
did
no, I'm
take a
just
little
stupid.
while
Yeah.
to come
Okay.
to people's attention,
Okay.
for at
Well,
least for in some
just
circles.
don't believe me anymore. Okay, yeah, no, that's good. Okay, yeah, so this came out, it was self-published in 2018 and then sort of blew up a few years later, basically in the manosphere. I would say it is the most interesting piece, the most interesting text by anyone associated with the manosphere or the right or the sort of far right, alt-right movement ever published. It's far more interesting than someone like Jordan Peterson. It's far more interesting than any alt-right thinker alive I can think of. It's incredibly flawed, and how I find it deeply interesting, not exactly for its ideology, but as much because of what it reveals about the mind behind it. Because the mind behind this book, I find both extremely depressing and also extremely reassuring in a way. In that I find the mind and the manner of thinking, and often even sort of the emotions and the way of understanding or the way of experiencing the world that is represented in the writing of this guy, extremely familiar to my own sort of way of thinking and experience of the world. But I find his ideological conclusions utterly dissimilar to the point of being just depressingly bad. This book seems to be the product of someone with an incredibly intense gift for analysis, but a pretty terrible ability to not to fall into sort of preordained conclusions. He's very much sort of chained to this sort of alt-right, far-right ideological mind frame, which really ultimately limits the way he understands the world. And yet, often, while he analyzes the world and how he talks about how he experiences the world, I find like a refreshingly both familiar to me and completely different from, most left-wing or right-wing commenters. Like, this guy has, I think, a kind of genius, a kind of deep intelligence to him. It's extremely mired and debased and ultimately completely comes apart in its conclusions. But in its thinking, there is something, fascinating and I think, and thrillingly interesting, or thrillingly, maybe not original, but at least sort of interesting and piercing in the way that I think sort of the minds of some artists are. And I think that's one of the things I really find fascinating about this book. This is why one of the reasons I really can't just say this book is political trash. I have no interest in it because I don't agree with it, and yet it does compel me. And also, out of most of the political writers, he is a pretty good prose stylist. He has a very weird style, as you say, Mrs. Elmo's articles, but he clearly can put a sentence together in English that is interesting and intriguing. He's not a terrible writer in a way that sort of most, quote unquote activists are. So that's my sort of general summary, and we can get to a lot of like my specific interests because I have some very specific things that he says that I agree with, especially or sort of find compelling, and I want to think about, especially when it comes to his discussion of homosexuality. I think also he has a section that at least I think sounds extremely like me, so we could bring that up. And then he also has sections I have no interest in. He has a complete lack of understanding of women, like an abysmal lack of understanding of women, and
I was gonna say that's the truest legacy that Nietzsche has in this book is his like complete misogyny and like just it's an utter blank spot in his comprehension.
But this guy is not Nietzsche. I mean Nietzsche.
No, no, no,
Nietzsche
no,
definitely
but
was.
no, but he is deeply inspired by
Oh
Nietzsche.
yes, yeah,
Yeah,
he's doing a Nietzsche thing for sure.
yeah, yeah.
His
And I mean,
style,
he refers
you
to
wouldn't have
Nietzsche
this guy without Nietzsche's
constantly.
style.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Schopenhauer, I think, is his most cited philosopher, but Nietzsche is definitely the second most. And Nietzsche. I mean, Nietzsche is a great genius, and at times can be incredibly misogynistic, and at times can say things that like one would wait to find in like the second wave of feminism said about women. So Nietzsche is always and endlessly embracing contraries. But this guy he's no Nietzsche and has nothing interesting to say
No.
about women whatsoever. His misogyny is the worst part. I mean, I think his racism is pretty bad, but
Yeah.
I find it slightly more excusable because I think he's just kind of he knows his audience is right-wing, white, disaffected incels, and I think his racism is him gesturing more to the incels than it is actual like deeply seated dogma. I think his misogyny is deeply seated dogma,
Yeah, I think
and
the misogyny
is
seems
worse for that.
sincere. I would say he's like in, yeah, it's hard to tell what he's doing for his crowd. Definitely the anti-Semitism feels like he's a Nietzschean anti-Semite, which genuinely is it's like a significantly different category because
Yeah, yeah,
Nietzsche's objection to Judaism is that it invented Christianity.
yeah. I
But
mean, he is also Jewish on I think one side of his family, so
sure, yeah, I mean, yeah, well, it
it's
would,
weird,
just
but
does
yeah,
not.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, in the same way that
No, for sure.
he seems both sincerely like homophobic and self-hating, but also gay.
Oh yeah, he's definitely gay. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, that's his other problem. He has no self-knowledge whatsoever. Um,
no,
and
no, he has, and
yeah.
like a little bit of self-knowledge could have made a lot of this very
Oh yeah,
entertaining. I
for
mean,
sure.
that's part like you know. I can make no diagnosis of the man. I mean, I can't make a diagnosis anyway because I'm not a doctor. But like, just taking this, like, I think part of the difficulty with this whole sphere is that everybody is constantly couching everything in ostensible irony. And so
Yeah.
I just sort of like I don't know, but if I take the book as written as a voice, that is I think a sincerely manic schizophrenic voice. Like
Oh, for
he
sure.
sounds like a schizophrenic with delusions of reference.
Oh
He
yeah.
sounds
I mean,
genuinely paranoid.
oh, I mean, he definitely is paranoid. I mean, there's a section where he talks about how he has visions of people without heads, and then starts ranting about how he believes Lovecraft was right about the universe.
Oh no,
He
I think
definitely has
he
problems.
thinks like reading him. It was funny because my thought was like he's like if a Borges character ended up in a Lovecraft story, but then I
Yeah.
realized like Borges has a Lovecraft story called There Are More Things. That's literally just an homage to Lovecraft, and like that character is so much more like level-headed than Costinella Mario. Like he for one thing, I think like he could have written a genuinely interesting short essay about gay culture that would have been like
Yeah, for
very
sure.
thoughtful and like surely offensive and surely provocative, but like actually somewhat insightful. And he does have like one very worthwhile insight that he makes about that. But
Yeah,
like
we can talk about that later.
yeah,
So we
also
can
like
talk about that. Yeah.
fascinating is like he has a sincere and like deeply rooted wrong belief in like crazy biology. He
Oh
has this
yeah.
completely backwards idea of biology. He writes, animals that have evolved under intense competition are in some sense stunted, less beautiful, less intelligent, less magnificent. There are many factions in nature and many paths that pull in opposite directions. You must learn to see the secret language of nature and where it drives at. There is one path that drives for the production of a supreme specimen. It is the path that governs higher life. Survival and reproduction are only side effects of this path. Life is, at its most basic, struggle for ownership of space. I mean, it's perfectly wrong. It's like he's like exactly wrong. I mean, in a way that's like, it's even like strangely like all of the ruthless, bloodthirsty, social Darwinist robber barons that presumably he looks up to, they loved about Darwinism that it is actually Darwinism. It is not this. Like, no, more competition leads to stronger and more formidable species. Like, clearly, like, that's why when species from little island nations encounter species from large continents, they get crushed. Like that's the reason. But he has these crazy beliefs, some of which are just like, okay, so he has like wrong science and got like all sorts
Oh,
of
he's full of factual errors. Yeah.
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 But
He's
then
intellectually
like
lazy.
less interesting than the just like generic wrong science stuff is a what seems to be a sincere belief that like for one thing the world is controlled by a it's not controlled by the 1% of the 1% of ultra rich people running their corporations. It's controlled by a secret centuries long conspiracy of hidden elites that we've never heard of who walk among us and just control us and pull the puppet strings. He believes that there are semi-human races living under the surface of the earth. My favorite part, and the part that felt in a way like the most Cameronic, was the belief that certain events and places across history and geography are identical. That basically, like
Oh yeah,
we're
yeah. That's a
living in a
wonderful
Freudian
chapter.
dream. He's like he takes this guy's proposal that the Crusades and the Trojan War were the same event, and it says like it blew his mind. He says he thinks Mexico City and Bangkok are literally the same place. Like
Yeah.
in a way, like that's so. I just want that as I want the Borges short story of that. But there
Yeah.
seems to be a sincere belief. Like he's like a melting clock that's right 5 times a day. Like he has because he will have these funny little observations, and he'll like call out Margaret Mead's credulity and some of the problems with sociology, which is like totally legitimate. But then he'll think that what is it? He had the line I really liked that he referred to people of Irish descent as bog drakes, which I really loved. He was like, because he's a big sun worshiper. He's like, all people should like. Basically, he thinks society should consist of beautiful, young, physically perfect, naked men who are ripped, should just walk around in public naked in the sun, get suntanned, and then you should keep some women on hand tucked away somewhere for breeding and oracular purposes. And otherwise, like everybody should like die at 30. Like it's like Logan's Run. Like he thinks everybody should die, in their 20s or 30s, early on when they're still hot. And basically, like everybody should be naked except the only people except like nobody should be naked or visible even who is not a young, hot, jacked guy.
He has a hyper hierarchical sense of like the superior society,
Like
which
he has like a bodybuilder. I mean, he literally is a bodybuilder, but
he is a bodybuilder. Yeah.
it's like a bodybuilder's utopia.
Oh yeah. Well, this is another reason I love this book because I have a friend who's sort of a bodybuilder who's sort of racist and homophobic and misogynistic. For me, it's a bit like if this friend sort of became really intelligent, like I sort of read this book and I sort of get the pleasure from that kind of vision. But yeah, I mean, his sort of vision, he doesn't want to return to ancient Athens because he has sort of a lot of critiques of the Athenian model. But he wants this sort of idea of a greater distribution between sort of the higher types of beauty and then sort of a return to a kind of a world of conquest and violence where the problem of overpopulation will be dealt with by the elimination of, the lesser types of weaker individuals.
Yeah. I mean,
He has this critique.
explicitly fascist. Like it's like
Oh yeah,
he's like
no,
it's
it's
not even.
hyper
He doesn't
fascist.
even bother to be fascist. It's like what?
Yeah.
It's like he was looking where he was aspiring to the ideals the fascists were aspiring to.
Yeah, it's like interesting fascism, like it's the most interesting fascism I've heard. I'll say that. I mean, there's a lot of very boring kinds of fascism out there, and he is pretty boring at times, but he has more interesting things to say about culture than I think almost all fascists that I've encountered before have.
The
But yeah, I
and
mean,
the other thing that's worth saying, because it sounds like we're just talking about a a a crazy book by a crazy man. This is apparently like there are books that people in the Trump administration pretend to have read, like the Bible.
yeah,
Apparently,
yeah,
this is the book they have all read.
yeah.
Like this is the actual Bible. Like it is hard to overstate the influence of this book in the right wing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Elijah. I was talking to Elijah about this, and he very kindly, I think, said to me that he thought I was more intelligent than this guy, which I thought nice. But
Oh, I
I thought
mean, I think like
maybe I should.
you're like I mean again like what is intelligence but like just for sheer coherence like if nothing else just the fact that you
But
like you can organize your sentences in a way that like there's a thread that continues through them
I mean, I think he's able to hold a conceptual thread together for a few paragraphs. But
for a few
I'll take the
paragraphs.
compliment.
That's true. For a few paragraphs you can.
But I was thinking maybe I should write my own sort of retort to this book, so maybe I could become an extremely controversial cultural thinker, but have some like group of people follow my
Hey, you
thinking. I
know,
mean,
the Democrats are looking for the Joe Rogan of the
exactly,
left, except they don't
exactly.
really want the Joe Rogan of the left because that's probably like Hassan Piker. They want the Joe
Yeah.
Rogan of the center left.
Well, this is the problem. Like the Democrats probably wouldn't want the book I'd write because it would be in
No.
its own way quite controversial. You know what I mean? Like it would be.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
I would hope it would be a lot less racist and misogynistic and anti-Semitic than this one. But it certainly would say controversial things, especially when it comes to like I don't know my theories on sexuality and stuff. And I think I think the left. That's that's the one of the most boring things about the left is its lack of plasticity when it comes to accepting alien concepts, which the right seems slightly more superior on, or at least superior on a superficial level, you know.
The famously tolerant right.
No, no, that's not what I mean. But you see my
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah. I mean,
writer.
the like the a line I plucked out. I listening to it. I typed out some things. I underlined things. I
Yeah.
have like lots of marginal notes that are just what the fuck is this? In the part that I read on the page. But like a line that I pulled out that felt to me like the secret true thesis of this book
Yeah.
is the modern world is a killjoy. And it
Yeah.
feels like
Yeah.
that's
That's true.
behind so much of
Oh yeah.
the anger in this book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
like that's a
we've
fair and
talked about this
honestly like that's a
before.
fair enough
Yeah. Yeah.
complaint.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, we've said this before on the podcast, haven't we?
Yeah.
About you've said, the left the left do not know how to have fun in the
Right.
same way that the right do with iconography. And I
Right.
think, that is definitely at the heart of this book. And it's
And that was
it's
not always the case, but that has become the
yeah.
case. I mean, my hope is that they
Oh,
are
yeah.
by like so much banking on Trump, they are now squandering all of their social like they are swiftly becoming as uncool as they can be.
Yeah. I mean, Ethan McGuire, who I will say again, does not support any of the views of BAP,
No.
did say to me it's interesting, or in his opinion, it's very interesting that BAP is so right-wing now, because he thinks sort of in the 60s or 70s he probably would have been a Marxist. And now
Yeah.
it's sort of fascinating that he swung the other way. And I think that is quite telling about the movement of sort of which 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 side of our political spectrum is more engaged in sort of the aesthetic and the beautiful and the sort of sheer joy and pleasure in sort of certain kinds of aesthetic opulence and even aesthetic violence that BAP is like all about, right? I mean, the sort of the primal masculinity. But yes,
Yeah. He
we
as
should
well as and
go
like
on.
it's hard also to overstate the number of references to like getting drunk in the club as like
Oh no, I
but
love
like
that.
and not but
Yeah.
like it's not even as like it's not even self-deprecating. He's like, and then I bravely went to the club and shoved the bouncer and then got the shit kicked out of me.
No, but
He seems to take like world shaping life lessons from like dicking around on MDMA.
oh yeah, well, I mean, me too. But like, yeah, so 2 points. So like,
Yeah, yeah,
A,
yeah.
I really relate to this talk about like getting beaten up at the club because that may have happened to me a couple of times. And B, it does
Don't
give me
push
hope.
bouncers. Don't do it.
It does give me hope because he'll say, and then I read from I can't remember, some theorist. He says the name of the theorist, but I can't remember the name of the theorist. And then I read that the Trojan War may have actually happened in the Crusades. And I was so shaken up by this theory that I walked around for days being adamant and stern. And then some bodyguard, some bouncer asked me if I was on drugs, and I shoved him, and they dragged me out into the alley and beat the shit out of me. And,
he,
like, and what
he
sort of gives me, I mean, what gives me hope about this is the fact that there is still people in the world that can be so that can feel an intellectual concept, no matter how, how much that intellectual concept might be bullshit. I'm not talking about the validity of it,
yeah,
but
yeah,
there are
yeah.
still people in the world that can experience an intellectual concept like that at the level of sensation so greatly that it will physically affect their behavior.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
feel
yeah,
like
yeah.
that definitely happens to me, and it
Yeah,
gives me
yeah.
hope that there are people like that in this world.
No, you know what? That part, you're right. I had not thought about it in those terms because he's also so like inadvertently comical in do because he will do the thing drunk guys do, which is he will describe how his own behavior appeared to them in ways that, like, it definitely did not appear. It'd be like a nobleman, I gestured bravely with my right hand. It'd be like, you were a drunk clown. Like, you were shit faced. But he's like imagining that he's Caesar. But no, like
Yeah,
you're
it's
right
very
that
relatable.
there is something alienating, not just about being like deeply shaken up by an idea, but by like in being shaken up by an idea, then seeing how little effect it seems to have on other people. It's very
Exactly.
disheartening. And
Yeah.
so, in that sense, I do relate because I do still have that a
Yeah.
feeling of like physical sickness at a realization
Yeah, yeah.
that yeah, like that does, it just feels like, why isn't anybody else bothered by this? So yeah, you're right. In that,
Exactly.
I can connect with him on in those terms.
And yeah, and this is sort of the whole point of my argument, which is that he feels like one of my tribe, not in his ideational
Yeah,
beliefs,
yeah, yeah.
but in his experience and interests, in his general interests. I mean, we in his sort of interest in philosophy and and literature, I think, that he has a very a similar broad set of interests to us, but it's taken obviously in a very different direction. But yeah, this that's why I like this book because it gives me this sense of familiarity. I feel like I'm talking to someone like me, even if that person has, encountered an entirely different worldview. But that's also part of the interest. It's how sort of things I think have been refractured through this worldview that I think is silly and completely inadequate to explain the entirety of actual reality and culture. But
Yeah.
that's the abiding interest for me.
No, yeah, it's funny because I find him so odious, but that aspect of him, because I know what you mean about like encountering somebody who feels like
Yeah,
a kindred spirit, even with a radically different.
yeah,
Because I've had that. It's the same feeling I've had about both Christopher Hitchens and Ta-Nehisi Coates, both of whom drive me crazy. But like when I listen to them, I think like, oh, in some core level, you're a writer in the way that I am. You are set at odds with the world and in love with this thing in a way that I
exactly.
find like deeply familiar.
Yeah, yeah. No, totally. And I mean, I'm sh even, his style, I think, I mean, I hope I have a more expansive style than him, but I know sort of from how many people see me on this podcast as kind of a provocateur and
Yeah.
like maybe a little. I mean, Elijah said something very funny to me the other day. He said, I was so surprised after spending time with you about how sane you seem, because from reading your blog, I was slightly worried that you were actually insane. So, I feel like I feel kind of empathy with Bap because I feel like in my own extremely minor way, I feel like I'm the kind of the closest thing to the Bap of this podcast and probably, both hated and loved in a similar way by a small section of Sleeper Kids listeners. But so,
Yeah.
I feel temperamentally there's some similarities as well.
Yeah, though I prefer to think of him as the Cameron of the right wing. Yeah,
Thank you.
but
That's
yeah,
fair.
you are. That's
Very
true. Like
flattering.
as I think I mentioned elsewhere, like when people are big fans of Elijah, it's because they agree with him. When people are big fans of you, it's because they disagree with you, but really enjoy listening to you say crazy things. I mentioned to somebody, well, I think I mentioned it on the podcast that you were going to be staying with Elijah, and like It's like a friend wrote to me with like sincere concern. He was like, "What? How is it? Like, they're gonna fucking kill each other. How is that gonna work?"
No,
But yeah,
I
but it,
think,
no, but it makes perfect sense. Like you actually
I
like
do,
get
yeah.
along. It's quite lovely, you know.
Yeah, I think me and Elijah have extremely different artistic sensibilities, but I think we have both enough respect for each other's sensibilities while also finding some parts of sensibility a little amusing that like I think we get on quite well. We've sort of in some ways we're perfect opposites, and instead of sort of that entering into conflict, I think it sort of combines to make kind of like a harmonium between
Yeah,
us
yeah, and like yeah, the
that is
two of
quite
you
wonderful.
are so in disagreement until you put you on like a street with a bunch of other people. At which point, like
Yeah.
the two of you seem like you're identical compared to with everyone else.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. In the, I mean, I don't think Elijah will like this, but I definitely feel that Elijah, in some ways, is part of my tribe. Maybe a very different part of it to Bronze Age pervert is, but yeah, no,
I think you would hope to be.
compared compared to most people, I think Elijah is 100 times, closer to me than he is than to most people I know. And like, yeah, no, it's wonderful to be like that, and it's wonderful also to be so close with someone who's so different. I mean, as Blake says, only through through contraries can there be true. No, sorry, only through opposition can there be true friendship, which is another reason to read Bronze Age Pervert or his book Bronze Age Mindset, because at
Yeah.
least it can channel the amount in all the ways in which you can disagree with him, and it can give you a better sense of your own, perspective on these matters.
Yeah, I my proposal is it's like usually when we talk about a book or a movie or something, I think like, hey, but really most importantly of all, forget what we're saying. Go read it. Go watch it. I kind of feel like the opposite here. Like I want it to be okay for you not to read this book after listening. Like if it, like you probably already know if this is something you want to bother to read. But yeah, it did drive me crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
partly I think like I also just like I have a very negative response to being negged. And
Yeah.
he is like what he reminds that's the thing is like he's very down on it's funny he does take care despite being such a Nietzsche fan. He does take care to throw some bones to the Christians because he knows his audience, I think.
Oh, definitely.
But like he clearly like hates like Puritanism. He hates like conventional American modern masculinity. But
Yeah.
like to me, he feels like Dave Smith. Like he is a bully in the same way that Dave Smith is a bully, the head of
Mm.
the old Hopkins writing department. And I
Yeah.
like my response to that is so reflexively fuck you.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So I
No,
think
he's
like
he's not a
it.
good. He's probably not a good person. He may well be a psychopath. He doesn't. He has no self-knowledge. He's in many ways a failure of a human being, but he's a quite fascinating failure of a human being compared to most people.
Yeah.
Should we do
He does have
specific?
some like. Yeah. You're right. You like he has style because that is what I'll say. Like
Yeah.
I'm not all that steeped in the manosphere. What I will say, and I know there are plenty of listeners who disagree, is that every single time I have ever read or listened to anything by Jordan Peterson, it has made me fucking like go very near to falling asleep. Like it is the most stultifying, dull shit I've ever encountered. I find him like I can't even get mad at Jordan Peterson. I just find him so fucking boring.
Oh, Jonathan.
This is not boring. Bronze Age Mindset is not
Yes.
boring. It does have style. Please God, I wish it had more articles. But and it's not just articles. It's like other little connective tissue in the speech that he just drops. I
Yeah.
think like I have a disproportionate reaction to that. Like it that cripples my ability to read more than I think it probably does like normal people.
Yeah.
But no, like he totally has style. I liked this little you think maybe I promote the ruthlessness of a machine politician with tuna-stained brown sport coat, or a petty office intriguer, or a catty interior designer with upward lilting voice who backstabs his colleagues to get contract. Fools! You think I'm here to promote a way of life or morality? No principles or ideas are of any use today. all will be retooled and taken over by people like these. Self-help is completely useless and not what this book is about. I mean, it then goes on to be a self-help book, but yeah, he has style. He is, again, like, he is a character, and if I could get smaller doses of him squarely framed in the quotation marks of somebody with a slightly like sounder vision of reality, it could be quite entertaining. Instead, it's like very obnoxious, very abrasive, and then it has moments of humor and insight along the way.
Yes. Okay. Well, we can focus on two moments. But yeah, no, I totally agree. And like to return, not to piss off your listeners even more. I mean, I think Jordan Peterson. I've listened to a lot of Jordan Peterson's podcasts, and I've read some of his stuff. Jordan Peterson is not an interesting philosophical thinker whatsoever. I mean, he
Oof,
has a
man.
talent for stringing quotes and philosophical lines together and sounding intellectual, but he has no interest. I mean, he flip-flops between being an atheist and being a Christian, depending on what his audience desires.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
not, I don't, he's a second-tier thinker. And I think, Bronze Age Pervert is much more, even more extreme than Jordan Peterson, but I think is, in his moments of genius, a far superior thinker to Jordan Peterson. I think if you want like
Oh, that's the thing. It's like Jordan Peterson doesn't see like I'm
he
really
has no moments
baffled
of
by like I
genius.
don't get what people like about him because it's not
Yeah.
even like he's like if you're really smart but you have lots of offensive ideas, I can still find that interesting. Like I'm
Yeah, yeah,
capable
yeah.
of using my brain to filter
Oh, sure.
like
Yeah.
but like I just don't find like what are the original ideas? What are the insights from Peterson? I don't like
No,
tell me.
that
I
is
don't
not.
get it.
No. No, it's terrible. I mean, if you do enjoy Jordan Peterson, I mean, obviously you don't, but I mean, just generally, the person I'd recommend, who is my favorite current quote unquote feminist writer right now, is a woman called Camille Paglia, who I do love, and
The
who
favorite
is
feminist of the far right.
yeah, who is maybe as no less insane than Bronze Age Pervert, and more continuously interesting, and wrong and right about a great many things. But I think the most interesting person I've read on gender of late. So I'd recommend her book Sexual Personae, sorry.
No,
And
I've heard, yeah,
that
I've
contains,
had,
yeah,
I've heard her strongly recommended, but also like
yeah.
strongly recommended by this guy and like Red Scare. So, yeah,
Yeah, well,
yeah,
I mean, she went to pieces in the 2000s and started ranting quite boringly about trans people, and I mean, no, even if you agree or disagree with what she says now, it's not interesting.
yeah.
But if you go back to her first book,
Okay.
I don't know how to say it. It's actually fascinating and very unique. And ContraPoints just did a video about it, though only to paying Patreons. So
Oh,
you're
did you
welcome to
on
read it.
Camille Paglia?
Yeah, on Sexual
I've
Persona,
been
which
meaning
I was
to
kind of trying.
subscribe to her. I should do that.
Yeah, no, I think, well, I think I've said it before, but I think I find her Patreon videos much more interesting than her main channel videos.
She's yeah.
So
Again, like I, it's funny because I do. She seems divisive in a way that feels like it's in a way it's undis like he's could not be more attempt like he's
oh
so
yeah,
attempting to be divisive like he's very
yeah.
successful at that but I'm it's funny like ContraPoint's videos I think are more controversial than they deserve to be
No,
like they
but well,
split
that's
people more than they ought to because they I think like she's quite she's quite like thoughtful and funny and self-aware.
no. This is the thing because I love ContraPoints. I hate her audience because I find her
Oh,
audience sort
what
of.
is her average audience?
I'd say our average audience is pretty left wing,
Yeah,
basically
yeah.
progressives. I think
Right,
less,
okay.
probably more liberals now because a lot of the progressives have like no ability to accept a differing opinion and have stormed off into Twitter. But like it is still pretty progressive, and I just like whatever you think about what she said about Israel and Palestine recently, and I, to be honest, don't particularly care. Like, I find the amount of just cancellation completely bizarre. Like,
Oh yeah,
what
yeah.
I feel sorry about ContraPoints is because I feel like I have probably impulses closer to like Bronze Age Pervert in that like I quite enjoy, you know, Jesus Christ, provoking people, right? I quite enjoy that impulse. Maybe a little sociopathically, but I do. And I feel sorry for ContraPoints because I think ContraPoint doesn't have that impulse. She
No.
is just honestly trying to make arguments. And that's why I feel it's so unjust when our audience, treats her like shit. Because she is someone coming here being like, I want to have this reasonable conversation. I feel like, I think Bronze Age Pervert, and me to a lesser extent, can make sort of sweeping generalizations. And I know people are going to respond and get, enraged. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's fair enough because you're matching the kind of irascible machine gun style with a response that's at least kind of fitted to that. But ContraPoints, whether she causes controversy or not, is not that kind of person, is much more reasonable, is much more anxious about negative responses. And that's why the negative responses to her in their in their quickness and in their unthinkingness are so unjust and so idiotic and so uncalled for.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I don't, I mean, and God knows have no special insight into the trans stuff, but there is something that feels like fundamentally cognitively trans. I mean, she is trans, but like,
Hmm.
oh, the impression I always get when I listen to her is that like she has access to the mind of a squirrely male philosophy nerd. But then,
Yeah.
like the governing mind, the mind that is like translating all of this to us, is a world weary, like grand dame who like is very aware of how the squirrely male nerd comes off and is trying to frame everything in a diplomatic way to an audience that does not have patience for the nerd.
Right. No,
Um,
exactly. Which is what, and
yeah,
I mean, I don't know if I'm a
which
nerd.
is part of what's so charming, you know?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Which is so charming, but also so irritating about our audience that they
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
have,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
you know,
It's,
ContraPoints would be well suited if she had an audience of ContraPoints. But sadly, ContraPoints does not have an audience of ContraPoints. She has an audience of lesser types, to take a to take Bab's phrase.
yeah.
No, I mean, I mean, I've been thinking, we don't need to get into this, but I've found trans discourse incredibly tiresome of late, and I'm not particularly interested in it. And I think that more and more trans activists are not doing themselves any favors by becoming hyper critical of like anything that differs from their own particular activist take on culture and sociology. And I
Yeah, yeah,
also
yeah.
think that, I mean, I think any great artist should attempt to be mentally transsexual. And Camille Paglia says this, that all great artists, in some sense, attempt through empathic reasoning to break down the bonds between gender. And I think to sort of, I don't like internally, I consider myself as a non-gendered entity, like as a consciousness, but I also sort of consider myself as an embodied entity, and therefore the fact that I'm masculine needs to be taken into account. But I think, artistically, the aim is always for some kind of crossing over, some kind of, destruction of boundaries. And I find that more and more leftist gender theory discourse destroys this kind of ambition and attempts to root things into some kind of, identity category. I think art is about, the annihilation and the blurring of identity, not about, the continuous neurotic, autistic, categorization of each identity and the solving and the kind of farming out of a politics around each identity. I think this is pretty anti-artistic, which is why I've become more and more disinclined toward that sort of wing of progressivism.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's probably a rant for
Because you're
another
right.
day.
There is something like even in the like the virtuous and understandable impulse behind like the Own Voices movement, which was the movement to have books that were not just about people from historically oppressed classes, not just have books like that are about black people, about women, about gay, trans, like, but books that are actually by these people who have their own insights. This was a movement, to so that it was not just white guys writing about other groups, but that we were actually hearing
Right,
from all
yeah.
these other groups. That part makes sense, but the part of it that feels very artistically impoverished is the part that then begins to suggest that one should always be writing about one's own identity, and that's like that just like murders the Madame Bovary c'est moi impulse, which to me is
Yeah.
like the essence of fiction, the essence of drama
Oh,
is like I am also this other person, and I am like I want to feel the existence of this perspective in my mind and as part of how I create.
well, I think, this reminds me a little bit of, I think it was Shane. I remember like many years ago, there was well, Shane was involved in this, but there was an outcry against I read about it with an interview with Shane, but there was an outcry against, a conceptualist poet who started posting online quotes from Gone with the Wind,
Yeah,
racist
yeah,
quotes from
yeah.
Gone with the
Shoot,
Wind.
what was her name? Yeah, no,
Uh,
I know who you're talking about. Yeah,
Starts
this
with a
was
V,
she was a
yeah.
she was a provocateur in the heyday of Kenny Goldsmith.
And so she posted, these quotes from Gone with the Wind, and her excuse was that by I can't, it was some conceptualist bullshit that has very little thinking about, but I think it was something along the lines of by posting and framing them, she was drawing attention to the racist element. And I think the outcry against that was perfectly valid because that doesn't seem to me artistic. That seems to me deeply lazy and ill-spirited and using actual human suffering in a sort of freewheeling and pointless way to support a kind of a weightless, meaningless piece of artistic, quote unquote, avant-garde experimentation. So I totally agree with the sort of the political anger that came at that. But at the same time, when there's talk about sort of appropriation in art, then I find this idea a lot more suspicious because I do think that I do not think is immoral. I disagree with Elijah here. I do not think that art ultimately is moral. I think art is either amoral or even immoral, but I haven't decided on which one yet. But I certainly think that art does not obey morality. And trying to sort of impose these sort of moralizing ideas about appropriation and understanding onto art is not even anti-artistic, but simply does not understand what art is. I think it's certainly true to criticize a work of art for attempting to imagine another person's experience and imagining that, wrongly or stereotypically or incorrectly, because that's a criticism of, the artistic method of the artist, and that seems perfectly true. But to say that an artist, but to sort of try and place limitations on the human imagination, I think is one of the most sort of dystopic and violent attempts to limit one of the most ultimately, divine elements of humanity, which is the artistic imagination. And to attempt to sort of destroy that, I think is completely alien and disgusting to like the true artist. And I think artists who sort of go along with that, I don't think they are real artists. I think they're careerists, and I have no interest in those kinds of people.
I just looked this up, by the way, and it's so much worse than I thought. So this is Vanessa Place. Oh my God, yeah, this caused like such an enormous
It was
storm,
definitely in the
and I'm
2010s.
looking at 2010, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
But so this is Vanessa Place. She was tweeting. I forgot what this was. She was tweeting the entirety of Gone with the Wind. This was back in the 140 characters days, and she was tweeting it literally 140 characters at a time. So it would break off like mid-word and tweeting it out. She was tweeting out the entire book that way. But her profile picture was of Hattie McDaniel as Mammy. And then the image, like the banner above the profile picture, is a like ghoulishly racist like cartoon from looks like the turn of the 20th century. That people were offended by this feels to me not far-fetched. Like, holy shit. Whatever insight, whatever like illumination this might purport to be offering, it is so deliberately obnoxious that like I'm just sort of just, like I'm a pretty devout free speecher, like, and I certainly wouldn't want to shut her down, but like, what are you doing, Vanessa Place? What the fuck is this? A story. I'm curious if you even heard of this. It's very brief, small. We can move on quickly. But I was just sort of curious because it felt like an instance of. I know that like the pendulum has very much swung when it's come to women's sports recently, and there's still lots of controversy, but like where just a couple years ago it would be it would be very difficult to find anyone not on the hard right who would propose that trans women should not compete in women's sports. This is, I have no deep investment in this issue, but this is a big controversy. It is very much swung, I think, mostly because Democrats are just trying to reposition themselves to be more electable. But there's one particular case of this that feels to me like a big, like such a loser case for gender critical feminists. And that is the case of Yosha Iglesias, who is a FIDE master chess player who became a women's international master. So Yosha is a trans woman who is now competing in women's competitions. So there are like in chess, there are open competitions where anyone can compete, but those are always dominated by men. And then there are women's categories which are all women. And now Yosha Iglesias is a male to female trans chess player, is competing in women's competitions, and gender critical feminists have really, really pushed to shut this down. And this to me just feels like, holy shit, don't like what a loser of a case for feminists to make. Because
Yeah,
the thing about chess is like the reason women need their own category, the reason men dominate chess is not because they're naturally better at chess. I mean, we have no reasonable way to study that because the numbers aren't remotely comparable because we're just dealing with a teeny tiny number of competitors among women. I think like there's maybe like some hardcore, Madeline von Savant, could make like a statistical argument along the Monty Hall problem lines. But yeah, it just feels like this is like, no, gender critical feminists, put on the brakes. Don't fight this battle. Let this person play women's chess.
yeah, it's bizarre shadow play, which is honestly my thinking of a lot of sort of. I mean, I think the whole gender sports problem is much more an interesting and much more sort of worthy for debate than most of sort of the trans criticism. But then again, I mean, Bronze Age, to maybe just intellectualize an idea Bronze Age pervert
Sure,
has
sure.
in a very sort of terrible way. He talks about, the secret elite. And I don't, I mean, this, he wraps this all up in ideas of QAnon, probably in an insincere wave to his base fans, but maybe in a sort of purely sincere, idiotic, paranoid maneuver. But I will say, if you take this idea away from sort of hidden elites and sort of understand it instead of as, I don't know, through, conceptual and social shadow play that keep us away from like, the real political points and keep us fighting in these sort of meaningless dark spaces, then I think both sides' activity over trans people in sports is such a case. I mean,
Yeah.
as ContraPoints points out in a video that was in one year, I can't remember if it was 2023. I'm not going to say, after getting the year of Bronze Age mindset wrong, I'm not going to stake my reputation on which year. But there was a year when there were more laws passed about banning and stopping trans people from competing in sports, and there were trans people competing in major leagues in sports. And again, like this seems to me part of the shadow play, part of the meaningless warring over things that are barely relevant to most people, but somehow are blown up in the public imagination into these sort of huge stereotypes that large swaths of the population take sides over, which distract them from the real and sort of much sort of greater, major and looming problems that are really like, wrecking and destroying their lives.
Yeah, yeah.
But which are hidden by this awful and bizarre and banal shadow play that everyone wants to sort of play in politics instead of facing up to the real, the real bleak emergency.
We talk about nonsensical, petty, ridiculous stuff here on this podcast, but like if you're into politics, like good lord, talk about some questions that actually affect people's lives.
Oh, I disagree. I
Yeah.
mean, we talk about poetry, and poets are the vanguard of heaven. So, it's
Who
of
who was
utmost
I was
importance.
there was some who was I talking to? Oh, I think it was Mark Leitner who like in his very gentle Jack Handy-esque way was like, oh yeah, he was doing some unacknowledged legislation. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
like I do think the most insightful part, and there were moments here and there where I thought like I think it's hard for me because I'm not super steeped in like the weirdo alt-right scene. It's hard
Yeah.
for me to know how much of this belongs to him and how much of this is just ambient in that world. But like,
Yeah.
he has a spiel about part of the problem with a certain stripe of leftist thinking is that it is. I mean, I think like the big complaint among Catholics I always hear is against Gnosticism, which I know is I think Elijah's also very very thinks Gnosticism is at the heart of much of modern evil. But he says you are not at bottom your intellect. This is impossible, although this is the assumption of almost all modern people, even when they claim otherwise. They pay lip service to supremacy of the desires or to biological determinism, but they still believe they are their intellects, just imprisoned by flesh and matter and genes and a biological programming. This is wrong. And I mean, I think like that's pretty much with him there. I do think that
Yeah.
is a real problem, and that we do sort of deny.
Yes.
Like honestly, I was listening to some intellectual Christian thinker recently who was making a case for how after the body is resurrected, what did he say? He said, well, I'm a neurologist, and so I know that memory is a physical event in the mind, in the brain. That there's a physical record of, like, memory is sort of a physical change that occurs in the brain. And so when your body dies, your memory dies. But he said, when you're resurrected on Judgment Day, you will have your body again. You will lose all of your memories, and you will have none of your emotional attachments from life. You will just have your pure intellect, which is your real self. And I thought, like, what a shitty, like what a sad, pitiful account of the self. That you were just this, like, you were the pure intellect. Like, that's the thing that's really you, is just your
And how
intellect.
and how confusingly inconsistent. I mean, how can the
Right. I
intellect
mean,
not
yeah,
exist,
like,
but you're being bred through memery? Like that makes
yeah.
no
Well,
sense
no,
on
he
any
said, like,
level.
well, you won't have memory. You'll just have perfect knowledge. And you're like, all right, okay, like, fuck, man.
Well, yeah, it just sounds like he's made up a new kind of an idea for the soul or something, which
Well,
it
I think
sounds.
he is actually a neurologist, but also is a devout Catholic. And so
Yeah.
he's sort of tried to square that circle. But then the part I thought he was most insightful, oh yeah, he's got the whole like alternate history where he thinks everything that's been recorded in history is, again, like, there are parts that sort of make sense, which is like there have been lots of mistakes in the recordings of history, and there have been lots of, like, inaccuracies or slight wrong inferences, and same with, like, archaeology or paleontology, famously with the brontosaurus. So, like, that there are these funny little inaccuracies and mistakes, and we assume things wrongly when we're trying to piece together the past. That's all true, but in his account, it's like a single malicious, all-powerful entity has written a false history to trick us.
Yeah.
And that's the
An
that's
evil Benedictine monk is
right. No, I
made
mean,
up all the
he
data.
believes in basically, like, the secret society of Tlaloc Orbis churches. Like, he thinks, again, like, it's a Borges story. He thinks that's real.
Yeah.
But then the part I thought was
I,
definitely most insightful was, well, I'll let you jump in, and then I want to talk
oh
about
yeah, yeah,
his
yeah.
account of gay
Go to
culture.
that point. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I
But
think
let
his
me.
account of gay culture is, like, again, very homophobic, also very gay, but
I
but
think his account of gay culture might be the true one of the truest bits in the book.
oh, I
I
think
think
it definitely
I'm
is. Like,
in
that's, again, like,
almost total agreement with her.
I wish this were just the whole
Yeah.
book, because
Oh yeah.
there's a version of this argument that I have heard either from, like, gay people who opposed gay marriage, because there was a certain group of those who basically said, like, there is a thing that is special about gay culture, and we don't want to just become normie bourgeois straight culture. So they were opposing gay marriage. And then also, like, both from, like, black separatists and from white racists, I have heard accounts of how basically, like, before integration, like, there was sort of like a more vibrant black culture and even economy, and a lot of, like, in Atlanta where I grew up, Auburn Avenue was sort of known as, like, the Black Main Street, and after integration it really fell apart. I mean, that was not, I think, contra the racists, that was not just because, like, the races mixed, it was also because of white flight. But,
Yeah.
like, there's the argument I've heard in the past is that, like, oh no, before, like, when there is a group that is oppressed, that group begins to cultivate its own interesting little distinct subculture that is sort of like a demi-monde of its own that can be really, really worthwhile and have a lot going on. And once the oppression lifts, that little world gets dissolved. That argument I've heard
Oh
before.
yeah.
His argument is a more robust version of it that I think is actually even more compelling, because it's not
Oh, I agree.
just
Yeah.
about the single oppressed group. It's about,
Yeah.
he calls it the Japanese word term is the
Oh,
floating world, or the,
wait. Before we
yeah, yeah,
get to
yeah.
that,
Go ahead,
I
go
just
ahead.
wanted to say, as a sort of final comment on his general style, that I
Yeah.
think another thing we should consider, if not fully, you can believe it or not believe it. I'm not saying it's completely true, but I think another thing to consider is that, again, when it comes to sincerity, I doubt that he thinks he's writing for people like us. I imagine that he thinks he's writing for pretty stupid people. And I
Ah,
wonder
okay.
sometimes if the extremity to which his arguments go is him both being amusing himself by being extremely extreme, but
Yeah,
also by
yeah.
attempting to push, things that are subtly true into some extremity that will be more apparent to the the ingrates he thinks he's writing for. So I think that might be worth considering when
Yeah.
understanding the level of his sincerity. I mean, he has this
We're
great
we're too
sentence.
we're too smart to understand this book, Cameron.
Exactly. Yeah, this book is it's for the plebeians. I mean,
Yeah.
here's a great sentence where he says, "You think I'm ironic? I don't do the gay irony," which I think is so amusing that itself I cannot help but find ironic, considering that he must, he's so fucking gay. I mean, like he probably doesn't know it entirely, but he must have some glimmering. So I think even at times he writes against himself. But anyway, so
Yeah, there is, and I don't know how much this is something you've encountered, both because you're much younger and because you're English, but there's like a certain portion of like gay male culture. I associate it with gay Southern culture, both white and black, although there's also like Atlanta is like distinctly like a black gay culture. But there's a version, there's like a portion of this like gay male Southern voice that's usually like my generation or a little bit older that is so acerbic, so cutting, so ironic, so like deliberately offensive and provocative that like it's incredibly entertaining, but also it feels like like it doesn't actually, it's very much outside the norm. Like it's a legacy of being pushed outside the mainstream and being like
oh
not
yeah.
allowed to participate, but it actually doesn't really line up tidily with any political agenda.
Oh,
It's
for
almost
sure. Oh
like
yeah.
wit and biting one-liners above all is almost the
Yeah.
like the ethos. And I have like a real affection for that mode of
Oh,
thought
me
and
too. Yeah.
speech, you know?
Yeah. And I think it appears in much more diluted and
Yeah, yeah. There's
non-culturally
but like it
normative
feels like
forms in
there's
media and
some
others.
because
But
he's Romanian, but he did grow up in America, and
oh
it does
yeah.
feel like some of that is like there's like a slightly disfigured version of that we're getting here.
Oh yeah. I think his entire book is a kind of agon when he's both trying to run away from it and embracing it simultaneously. As I say, because he has no self-knowledge. But yeah. So his main comments on I think his most interesting comments on gay culture, I think, are in section 34 or something like
Yeah, yeah,
that.
33, and yeah, I started to underline it, but it's like there's like a good 5 page section that I think is like pretty smart, and I like
I mean, it's too long to quote from, but do you want to try and maybe
yeah,
paraphrase your understanding of it, and then I can like comment after your comments?
yeah. And I think like it's twofold. So like it's partly that so when it was not acceptable to be gay, but you're not going to eliminate the existence of gay people, and they want to get together, and so you end up having, he refers to it as the gay underworld, and he makes this point over and over again that like the gay underworld was not just for gay people. He's very critical of what he calls like the modern homosexual or the queen, and he has like a whole like pseudo Freudian theory about how queeniness as a characteristic of some gay men develops, and how it, he has a theory about like the distorted masculinity of modernity. But the thing that I did find really, this is a slightly longish passage, but I think I can read at least most of this here. In the 1950s and a little before then, when the system of global tyranny was being firmly erected, this is like part of his. Yeah, well, won't deeply examine that, but it should not be a surprise from everything that has been said that the gay underworld was the negative of the New World Order, its sieve and pressure valve. The gay underworld was part of the remainder. The phenomenon of homosexuality in the modern world reaches up to the most profound of political and social problem. Again, broken English. It was always the ghost world. This is the part I really liked. It was always the ghost world, the underworld left over that the engineers of our time couldn't manage or account for in the erection of the Leviathan. This underworld included far more than the gays of that time, of course. That's the point. But the gays formed a kind of bulk population that allowed an easy bridge between this world and ours. They made it far more permeable to others as well. If you had girlfriend, maybe artsy girlfriend, she had gay friend, you could go with them to lounge of this half world. And there would be there maybe two social contacts removed, there would be one of them. And now that this world has disappeared, you have no easy way of even knowing where to start. Its boundaries were policed, its entry points were surveilled, but it always existed as a space of freedom outside the pervasiveness of domestication in post-industrial world. Let's not forget, I repeat, that the gay underworld was hardly just the gays, but precisely that world penetrated by all types of deviants, perverts, whores, pimps, impresarios, nightclub owners, mafia, gangsters, spooks, intelligence services of all kinds. Just see the Dark Ocean Society, and you will understand. He's talking about Dark Ocean Society in Japan. This was an instance where, like, I had to text Ethan because, in context, given he's talking about ghosts, he's talking about intelligence services, and he's racist, and he's talking about people sort of outside the approved social order. I literally had no idea which of the three meanings of spooks he meant.
Oh yeah, me
Like,
neither.
is this a
Yeah.
racial slur? Is he talking about spies? Is he? I think spies maybe is the answer, but like, is he talking about actual ghosts because he's also insane? But no, like the idea that there's this, it's like the underworld. It's not. It's this is not just like, oh, gay culture had something special or black culture had something special. Like that, there was this forbidden group created the opportunity for a world where people could go in and out. Like what it reminds me of is when Foucault makes the argument that like we shut away our mad people, our insane people in asylums for a while, and that was actually really bad both for them and he said for us because we didn't anymore have conversations with them. And now then we just abandon them to be homeless. And he said that what we really need, a healthy society needs to have some way of having commerce with the insane. Like you don't want insane people to run your country, but you also don't want to, you want that to be an opportunity for a kind of a permeability for some dialogue. And similarly here, like there is something about a healthy culture that has a, again, like it's not like you want to impose restrictions or you want to forbid or oppress people, but you want there to be some sort of other space that is separated and kind of permanently divided. It can't merge with the main space, the mainstream, the public square, but it is sort of, it exists separate and you can enter it and exit it. And the existence of an oppressed class is what gives it enough bulk to continue existing. And it just felt like that is actually, that's a really insightful observation about like part of what makes a culture really healthy. And what occurred to me was that like as restrictions on sexual behavior or some other racial classes lifted, which was good, which again, like not, I don't think these people should be repressed. Like as that lifted, then you started to have there's sort of a question of like, well, what is that other space? And I think it's probably in the heyday when this was sort of first emerging, that other space became the space where people would use like the R slur or other like places online where people would say deliberately offensive things as a way to almost as like a password to the ghost world.
Right. Yeah.
And like that became the space where you could have these other interesting things going on. Again, like the best party in town is clearly going to be like the party at the gay guy's loft that is off limits, that's forbidden. I mean, in a way, like prohibition definitely created this in America. Like prohibition had a lot to do with like women being allowed into public spaces because when you have an illegal speakeasy, it's not like you're, I mean, they became, in less, sex segregated, even less race segregated. Like when you have an illegal forbidden space, it creates the possibility of a certain kind of interaction that you can't really have in the mainstream. And I like,
Oh yeah.
it
No,
is a real
definitely.
loss when your culture, when that vanishes, or when it just gets ceded to total creeps or
Yeah.
actual like mafiosi or like dog fighters.
Yeah, no, there's a balance. But yeah, no, I mean this is, fits in with a lot of the arguments I've been making. I mean, it fits in my argument that I made about the Toni Morrison's utopianism about oppression in her speech, that oppression is an enabler in the Hegelian master slave dynamic of a kind of knowledge. And without oppression, that knowledge or that experience or that effect is not present. I totally agree with Bab about sort of contemporary queer culture. Contemporary queer culture is, in my opinion, basically as pathetic as contemporary heterosexual culture. And contemporary queer culture, its greatest crime is that it still thinks it's the culture of the outcast and the oppressed. But it isn't.
Right, right,
It's the
right.
culture
Yeah,
of
yeah,
the
yeah.
identity fetishist. And it's the
Yeah.
culture of people who attempt to sort of dress themselves up in terms of oppression while living perfectly safe bourgeois lives. And it has
Yeah.
nothing to do, or none of the sort of energy or dynamism of the actual sort of gay culture of the oppressed and the gay underworld of previous years.
Yeah.
It's become as purged and clean as the straight culture it claims it wants to mark, which is
No,
another reason
it's
I
exactly as edgy as like uncapitalized free verse poetry.
exactly,
Like
yeah. Yeah,
it's
it's
really it's
meaningless.
bucking the system just as
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's meaningless, and it's why I say that, like, I find both straight and queer culture are as detestable as each other in different ways. But that is because of quote unquote social progressivism and the Enlightenment and the lack of oppression and sort of underworldy atypicality that Bach talks about. I think this is I mean, to go a little bit back to his Freudian commentary about homosexuality, which I also kind of agree. So he has this,
Do you want
discussion.
to summarize it for people who might not?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He has this discussion about, so he takes a theory by Camille Paglia, which is herself a theory, basically, it's basically a Freudian theory, which is to say that, like, the many, homosexual men nowadays are basically young, sensitive males, prototypical aesthetes or aesthetes, depending on how you want to say it, who are turned off by the violence and, intensity of masculine horseplay and through a kind of over familiarization with the feminine, the mother figure, becomes so estranged from masculinity that they eventually fall into sexual desire for it. And BAP, I think, interestingly, and I think more interestingly and more nuancedly critiques this and says that this is half right, but the other half is not that these men, not that these aesthetes, these young boys dislike masculine horseplay for its violence, but they actually sense the basic patheticness, the basic meaninglessness of the violence. They realize that, like, whatever is apparent about heterosexual horseplay in the modern age, it's actually, despite it's seeming sort of violence and desire for conquest and play fighting, it's actually as contained and restrained as anything else by sort of the age, and
Yeah.
instead of being
It's
like an
vulgar and
actual,
inauthentic.
yeah,
It's
it's
yeah.
inauthentic, right? It's not an actual practice. I mean, Bab is very obsessed with conquest, and I think conquest it is a term he prioritizes too highly. But to take his argument, it's not true conquest, it's conquest and power within the specific social system given to them. And I think this is very true. I think that most, heterosexual culture now is inauthentic and as constrained as Bab says it is. And I think this is true. I think there is a recognition. Bab then claims that
And sorry,
the
just in
mistake,
case people are missing it, you're
yeah.
doing what it's very he is typically online referred to as just as the acronym BAP.
Yeah,
So
sorry,
that's what you're
BAP,
saying.
Bronze
Yeah.
Age pervert, BAP, yeah. I mean, I think it's also a funny way to slightly ironize him, to call him BAP, considering how seriously he takes himself.
Which was also like that was an adaptation of the old offensive term Jap, which but it was Black American Princess was what
Oh,
yeah
really?
was
I've
what
never heard
BAP
that.
because that's what I've always heard BAP
Interesting.
used as before this,
Ah,
which then makes me more amused when I hear people refer to
yeah.
him that way.
Yeah, no, that's quite fitting. Yeah, so Bab says that the problem is that these young men then, after realizing the inauthenticity and moving away from, rejecting this culture, ultimately come to serve it by becoming gay. They become, even though he calls them the higher types, because he thinks of them as more mentally sensitive, more intellectually complex, more curious, more open to sensation, and therefore are higher types. He thinks they become the kind of aesthetic foot soldiers of the regime they first reject in their sensing of the inauthenticity of masculine fighting by eventually becoming gay, because then their homosexuality is absorbed into the current culture. It's far too generalizing in its sort
Yeah.
of belief that most of these men wouldn't be
Yeah.
gay. And I think it also it's
Yeah.
telling, right? That like he's like, well, they wouldn't be gay 100 years ago. Like it seems very,
Yeah.
self-telling on
I
himself.
mean, like
Uh,
what it also seems like conflates, like what does seem true is that the manner, like to the extent to which like queeniness is an affectation or a manner that we recognize today, like I'm sure that would look very different 100 years ago. Like I'm sure that part
right.
is responding to social
Yes.
norms. Like, but like that I don't know, especially with men, like men who really want to have sex with other men, it feels like boy, people have worked very hard throughout history to boil that out of like that seems like that's pretty well cooked in there. Like
Oh
people
no, it's
who like
certainly.
that does not seem like that sort of, oh, I accidentally became gay.
Well, I certainly think that's true. Although I would say that, cult it's slightly more malleable than I think a lot of people will admit. I mean, if you
Yeah,
look at
yeah, yeah,
ancient
yeah, yeah,
Athens,
yeah. For the
the
like
whole
in the same
cultural
like
spectrum.
female sexuality is more fluid today in part because for the same reason that like female clothing is more fluid. Like that like there is a
Yeah.
social pressure that helps influence that.
And here's the point I'd like to take away. I think that like people love to sort of, claim their sexuality as their identity. But if we understand that like one's sexuality and even the way one understands one's sexuality is as much the product of the certain forces of one's culture that push one towards that element, then one is in a sense, inescapably aligning one's identity with a particular cultural moment. Like to say that one is gay in the 21st century is to imply a certain set of traits which are extremely different to the traits of like ancient Athenian men who fucked, teenage boys and teenage boys who fucked ancient Athenian men who might also be considered in that way gay. And I think like this is the thing that I think you can extrapolate from back and that like I would like people to take away that this sort of obsessive identity claiming around sexuality gives oneself over to the power of culture and basically turns one into an instrument of culture.
Yeah.
Self-definition should not be based on one's sexuality because inherently one is entangling oneself and making oneself become, to use the right-wing terminology, basically the cuck of one's particular culture.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
in that way, I think it's very true. There are certainly sort of people who develop sexuality based because of, I don't know, daddy issues or stuff like that. And that sexuality definitely seems to me, to some extent psychologically malleable, as opposed to people who simply are on a pure instinctual level in love with like, I don't know, the male body, right? This pure love of masculinity, which is a very different kind of homosexuality and which was much more apparent in ancient Athens, and which I think if Bap was much more self-knowing, he would attempt to sort of praise and give as a sort of alternative to what he sees as like the problems with the modern queen, and which I would be probably, a lot more favorable towards, or at least a lot more happy to hear out, as opposed to, his lack of self-consciousness. But like, it's an interesting argument that I think compared to most of like leftists incredibly crude sort of kid glove handling of sexuality really does get at some interesting social diagnosis about, the presence of queer culture now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the things that is sort of illuminating about having kids or spending time around kids is that you see aspects of adult like psychology rendered like crude and simplistic. My daughter will see something that's, just like an internet pop-up thing asking for money and she'd be like, "Oh, we should give them money." Like, no, no, we shouldn't. Or like they'll see, see an advertisement, like you just see like the immediate one-to-one, like, "Oh, I want that thing now." Like, well, no, they're
Yeah.
just showing you a thing that they want you to want. But similarly, like you see it with like the dumb obvious example is like, oh, I'm a big Taylor Swift fan, or like, oh, I'm a big Billie Eilish fan, but I can't stand Taylor Swift, or like my younger daughter is really into Sabrina Carpenter, which like, it's like people get mad about Sabrina Carpenter's sexuality, which seems like, is it sexuality? It's like Betty Boop sexuality. It's like, but like, they're into these sort of flavors that are present, and again, like these are actual, young women performers, and God bless them. But it feels very much like a ready-made identity. And then what's amazing is seeing, like, we don't have boys, but like some of our friends' sons, we'll ask, like, well, what are they, it's their birthday or Christmas. What are they really into? What can I get them? And the answer that blows my mind for so many little boys is, oh, what is he really into? Oh, he's really into Nike, like a thing with a
Yeah.
Nike swoosh on. And I think, like, what? That's not even a thing. That's just a brand. But honestly, like, that's just a very crude, simplified version of what we do as well when we're, like, oh, I'm in the K Hive for Kamala, or I'm a big MAGA
Yeah.
guy. Like, we do the same thing. We just have it, we dress it up in a slightly more sophisticated way. And I do think that you're right that, like, one of the real like soft spots in progressive thinking has been a refusal to acknowledge when this happens in other aspects of our lives, that, like, the degree to which, like, clearly our sense of self and like, to the extent to which you lock in your whole worldview based on your identity, when your
Right.
identity is then clearly shaped by, like, crude market forces, then you're giving over your sense of reality to a corporate gesture catering to DEI. Like,
Yeah.
every end of the Bud Light controversy was repulsive. Like, everybody, I mean, in a way, like, I felt worst for the poor trans woman at the heart of it, because she just, like, they just sent her some cans with her image on them, and then everybody on every side lost their minds about it. And I'm like, you're all fucking idiots. Like,
No,
why
yeah,
is
well,
this?
it's just
Why does this matter?
it's like watching people be manipulated. I mean, have you heard
Yeah.
about the new Sydney Sweeney controversy?
Oh, Christ in heaven. Poor,
Yeah.
Jesus. Yeah. That
Because like I read
this is for people who don't know, she did I haven't even seen it, but she did an advertisement. She's a beautiful blonde woman with large breasts, which apparently is political in some way. The joke was, it's a jeans commercial, and the joke was that she has good genes. And then people
yeah.
lost their minds, either because this is a crypto white nationalist fascist, good genes are being blonde-eyed, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, beautiful white person, or they lost their minds because it's crypto fascist and that's good. And actually, we do need to promote eugenics. And this was like one of his, like, more sincere crazinesses, is he does seem like an honest to God eugenicist. And that seems like
Oh
that's
yeah,
really,
that's
really
one of his core
sincerely back
essentials.
on the rise among the hard right. And I feel like, holy shit, what a loser of a, like, come on. Eugenics? Eugenics
Yeah.
again?
Oh no, I mean yeah, race science and eugenics
Especially race eugenics. Like, this is not
yeah.
even like, oh, we
No,
want to, like, cure, cystic fibrosis. This is like race eugenics, like the dumbest of the dumb.
I actually find sort of the very general concept of eugenics as kind of selective breeding, like of vague interest, not in like in a way that I support or I don't support, but like I find it interesting to think about, but I have no interest in like race eugenics, which
Oh my
just seems
God.
like, the incredibly stupid
Yeah.
bullshit. But yeah, no, this is again, like I don't particularly believe in the hidden elite, although maybe I'm a fool. But like when, Bat talks about, everyone being manipulated and used by these silent forces, I get like a vaguely similar feeling when I hear about this sort of the Sydney situation, because the Sweeney situation, because it seems, everyone has been jerked on the chains or jerked by their chains by, by this advertisement. The advertisers knew exactly what they were doing, and they got everyone to react in the way they thought they'd react.
Oh yeah. No, it was a very successful campaign.
And I think like this is like this is the indictment of the age we live in, and this is where, it gives me a slight, again, a very, very, very tempered and agnostic sympathy towards BAP, in that we live in an age where everyone has so fallen out of complex thinking and has so fallen into identification with singularities and lack of complexities, that we do live in an age of perfect manipulation. Everyone, the left wingers, the right wing, the leftists, the right, the alt right, we're all easily manipulated by these sort of, the greater and different capitalistic forces. And I mean other forces, not just capitalistic, I mean, governmental, political, whatever. But like we do live in an age of perfect manipulation. And like the kind of rage that someone like Bat brings to this, and the desire to sort of smash people out of this, like, out of the sort of Plato's cave of being manipulated, is something I can certainly, empathize with, even if his ultimate conclusions about what this means are completely fucking insane.
That was the first half of my conversation with Cameron about Bronze Age mindset. We talk more about the book and everything else peripherally related. Again, if you enjoyed the first half of the conversation, I think that is a good advertisement for the second half, which is available on The Secret Show at SLEERICKETS.substack.com. Go put your email address in now, and I will give you a week's access for free. After that, it's pretty fucking cheap. It is actually quite cheap. Like, it is a lot cheaper than your standard Substack. And I don't blog, so you won't get little newsletters that you have to delete. I will just really send out episodes. I think the last time I sent out a notification that was not just a new episode, it was like a year or two ago. So I really will not clutter your inbox. Again, go to SLEERICKETS.substack.com. If you genuinely have trouble paying for The Secret Show, but you would very much like to listen, then send me a note at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com and I will hook you up. And if you have some expendable income and you would like to support the show and other listeners, then sign up to be a motherfucker of the arts. It's a little more expensive, but it makes this all possible for us. And you'll have my ear if there are any perks that you would like to, if there are any special perks for the motherfuckers of the arts, send me a note. Let me know what you think, and I am all ears. All of you who sign up for The Secret Show are also eligible to send in listener crit poems. You send in a poem, I will read it anonymously on the show and give it a frank and substantial critique, along with possibly Cameron or Alice, depending. So again, all of that is at SLEERICKETS.substack.com. Thank you all for listening, and with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.